A reading from the second book of Samuel. In those days, all the tribes of Israel came to David in Hebron and said, "Here we are, your bone and your flesh. In days past, when Saul was our king, it was you who led the Israelites out and brought them back. And the Lord said to you, 'You shall shepherd my people Israel, and shall be commander of Israel.' When all the elders of Israel came to David in Hebron, King David made an agreement with them there before the Lord, and they anointed him king of Israel." The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
I sent a video not too recently to a number of the brothers in the house, so they probably have already seen this. It was an Irish comedian who was making fun of priests he had heard at Mass. And he was saying most of the Irish priests that he's heard at Mass goes something like this. Jesus was very nice. He came into the town on a donkey. He was very nice. There was a big tree. Jesus looked at the tree. Then he looked at everybody else and said, "It's very nice." Then he said, "That's not a preacher that you can really put your faith in. There's not a whole lot there." On the other hand, what's the kind of a priest, a preacher that he would want to come into town? He said, "I want a priest who comes in 3 a.m. on a donkey, haggard, grizzled, with a big old nasty beard. He's got his hair all crazy, a wacky look in his eye. He's chewing on locusts and sucking honey from a bee's rear end. This is the preacher that I can put my faith in." Crazy, nonsense. But there's a great family resemblance there. There are all sorts of crazy people in the history of Christianity. I love all of them. I love these great characters. They were the Egyptian monks. They lived on pillars in the middle of the desert. They'd climb up on the pillar, and that's where they'd live for the rest of their lives. I love them. They're great, fantastic. There are also these characters who I absolutely love in Russian literature. They're called fools for Christ. They're absolutely fantastic. They go around in Russia, in Russian Orthodox culture, and they pretend they're crazier than all get out in the middle of the town square, so people will throw rocks at them and call them names. And they're saints. They're great saints in Russian Orthodox literature. But they're crazy, and I love that. There are different kinds of crazy, of course, but there's a real family resemblance here of crazy that I just have to stick to here. Because it's the kind of crazy you can really kind of put your faith in. It's the kind of crazy, you know, if that preacher comes into town with the crazy looks in his eyes, this is the one who really believes it. He's the one who thinks all the nonsense in this book here actually makes a difference. Now, of course, there are different kinds of crazy. I knew a lady named Mrs. Jesus who would light votive candles and put them under pews in the church. That's not the kind of crazy we're talking about here. Let's be pretty clear. The kind of crazy we're talking about has a family resemblance. It's the same kind of crazy that causes people to give their lives for the faith. It's the kind of crazy that causes people to abandon their families to join religious life. It's the kind of crazy that causes nutso people like me to come into the Dominican order and think that this is where I'm supposed to be. It's a family resemblance, but it's a kind of crazy that's not like thinking I'm Napoleon Bonaparte. It's thinking that I'm in love with God. At least I hope. Now, some people might like to disagree with me on some of these things, I'm sure. So I'm not telling anybody here that they need to stop bathing. You probably should bathe more. You might want to keep some bees in a little drawer at your desk side. That might be okay. But there's a kind of crazy here that's really important for us Christians. And there's an interesting thing here in terms of how it reflects the reign of God, because the reign of God really is this kind of crazy when we think about it, I think. The first is the reign of God that lives in these people's lives is the same reign of God that causes them to do all these crazy things out of love for God. It's love for God that causes them to do these things, not anything else. And it's a reign of God that comes into their lives. It's this love that's so overpowering that it's not polite. It doesn't ask for permission to come into their lives. These people didn't want to live on pillars. The Holy Ghost can't be house-trained, sorry. The reign of God doesn't wipe its feet on the mat before it comes into your house, generally speaking. But number two, what's I think even more important than the first bit, which I think is pretty obvious to most people who are Christians, is that the reign of God is going to win out in the end. The crazy people are going to inherit the kingdom of heaven. Whoops. The crazy people are the one you're going to see in heaven. I'm probably going to see Mrs. Jesus because I've made fun of her now. But it's the crazy people, the people that take the gospel seriously, whose faith you can really hang your hat on. They're the people that are going to get to heaven. And the question I think that I have for myself sometimes is, where do I stand in the midst of all this? Because we know that the reign of God is going to win out. It's already won out in our own lives. We've seen all of these trends go by in terms of the Christians won out. Guess what? Roman Empire fell. They tried. It was a valiant effort, A for effort, gold star. The Romans didn't win. The Christians did. Another, we've been reading all about the Maccabees. They went against the Greek Empire. The Greeks lost. You don't find the Hittites or the Jebusites running delis in New York City nowadays. You find this little kingdom of Israel under David, who've now spread across the world. So where does that leave me? Whose side am I on? Am I with the crazy people or not? Vinny knows what side he's on. Am I going to be that one standing outside watching as all the crazy Egyptian anchorites pull their pillars through the cobblestones of heaven? And I'm going to be outside with all the very nice people, where it's not too busy and noisy and all the people aren't screaming like nuts. That's how I imagine heaven, at least. It's pretty fun. I like it. But that leaves me with one last thought, maybe, about the reign of God. When Jesus died on the cross, everybody else thought he was nuts. He intentionally went to the people that were possessed, raving lunatics, mad, crazy. The reign of God looks like that. The kind of love that was willing to go and die on a cross, didn't need to, did it anyway. No real kind of necessary reason to do so. God could have chosen any number of other things to do. He did that one. Am I going to be able to say, in fulfillment of this very prophecy that we read today, at that last judgment, to the eternal reign of God, here we are, your bone and your flesh, to Jesus Christ, be thou my king forever and without exception. Can I be that kind of crazy?